The following content is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. You're listening to the Everyday Therapy Podcast. I'm JC Rader.
And I'm Julianne Schroeder.
And we're therapists bringing you honest conversations around emotional wellness and self-development.
Inspired by our personal experiences in therapy and because of our clients, we realize therapy has so much to offer both on and off the couch. Listen for tips and tools to navigate all the challenges that life throws your way.
To give us feedback on topics and guests, or for more information on our community events, counseling, or online services, contact us at everydaytherapypodcast.com. Hello, and we are with White Rock Counseling here in the heart of Dallas, and you can find us at whiterockcounseling.com. So both Julian and I are professional counselors, LPCs, and also registered yoga instructors.
Sorry. That was a pause. That's where I was supposed to come in and say something meaningful. But no, today's episode we're excited for, and we're going to talk a little bit more about White Rock Counseling. Our specialties, yes. So, sorry guys. We're getting back into the group of things.
Yeah.
JC and I, we both specialize in working with anxiety, relationship issues, self-esteem.
Yes, yeah. So you can find us at whiterockcounseling.com, and yeah, there's our website. Cool. So let's jump right into our topic today, which is attachment styles. And I have been dreaming about this podcast since probably
before the podcast started.
Yeah, before the podcast started. Like whenever I used to dream about having a podcast 5 years ago. So this is very exciting.
No pressure.
Yeah.
No pressure. Right.
And it's right around our 1-year anniversary. So I kind of feel like happy anniversary, Julianne.
Oh.
Happy Everyday Therapy anniversary. Yes. That's exciting. Thanks, Becky. Golf clap back
Well,
there.
and thank you to our listeners.
Yes, for hanging around for a year.
And I don't know, I am surprised at times, when I hear people, and my yoga class the other week, I told you about how somebody came up and I was like, we found out about your podcast. And so, yeah, people are listening. Imagine that.
I know. It's weird. People are still listening. So, okay, attachment styles. What is it? Well, first, let's talk a little bit about what has motivated us to do this podcast. So we are trained in our counseling program as far as grad school goes about attachment styles. And I read this amazing book while I was in grad school, and it kind of changed my life. It was like magic. That's how most of my clients feel about it too. So John Bowlby was an attachment therapist. So he kind of created this theory called attachment theory. Way back in the day. I don't even know the year. Did you look up the year?
Yeah, so late 1960s, early 1970s. And
okay, so we're at 60 years ago.
Yeah, and so he was not only a psychiatrist but a neuroscientist, which I think is really important to add validity to this theory of really just how I guess just how important and ingrained these patterns can be from birth. So.
Right. And so basically attachment theory is we're looking at kind of when as a child, the way that you're treated by your caregiver, the relationship you have with your caregiver, kind of dictates how you end up having this was his theory at least, dictates how you have relationships, like future romantic relationships. And I think sometimes even friendships, this stuff can show up.
Yeah.
too.
All sort of connections and any sort
Yeah.
of attachment to anybody.
Yes. Yeah. And so, I don't know, it's just super powerful. And so basically, there was a book that was written by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller. We have it here. It's called Attached. And it's kind of a more modern perspective on Bowlby's research and brings out in layman's terms versus like the psychotherapist, like psychobabble, neuroscientist babble.
And it has quizzes. Everybody loves a good quiz,
Yeah.
right? You know,
Yeah. So
where you just like
definitely-
bullet point and you figure out yourself.
Yes, it's like BuzzFeed
Yeah,
in this
yeah.
book of like Cosmo, BuzzFeed, whatever. You're a millennial.
But a little more elevated.
Yeah.
And founded by research. But catchy.
Yeah, and so this is super catchy. So like
Yeah.
subtitle of the title is The New Science of Adult Attachment, How It Can Help You Find and Keep Love. Wow, everybody wants to read this book now or slash listen to this podcast. So yeah, let's see, where do we even start now?
Well, I want to just elaborate a little bit more on John Bowlby's work and
Yeah.
you know, looking at really what he studied between caregivers, primarily moms,
Okay.
and infants, was looking at responsiveness and availability.
Okay.
And so those are important because that is going to come up in your adult sort of relationships. So, I mean, basically what he did in his labs was that he just looked at children, like infants, responsive or reactions to their moms, either being responsive or not. And just like categorized and found patterns to different sort of infants' responses.
Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong if
Yeah.
this is his experiment or a later one kind of based on this. But
Oh, I think I know where you're going.
okay.
Mary
so,
Ainsworth. Yeah. The stranger experiment? No, I'll be quiet. Go ahead.
Oh, let me. We're not the best with research. We know it's been done, and we know the studies, but yeah. So okay, so the infant is put into a room, and the parent leaves the room, and the child like cries profusely and bangs on the door until the parent comes back, and so like that is like an interesting response that a child does, and like makes sense. You know, we've all seen it, and then. So the second experiment that they do, like the child is left in the room, like the parent is there and responsive, and the child is able to kind of explore and like, I don't know, just be a child, like be present, be.
Yeah. So they're playing with their toys, like
Yeah.
not too concerned.
So
Yeah.
like it's hardwired in our brains, like it's our biology to like be scared if we don't have like a secure relationship. Like as a child, survival, we need somebody to take care of us. And even evolutionarily, like back in the day, you know, we needed like community, we needed villages, like we didn't have all this stuff to be so independent.
Yeah.
So I think that that's important in
Yeah.
like looking at your attachment style, that it's hardwired in your brain, in your biology to need people.
Yes, yes, and like to go back to one more response is when the parent leaves the room. You could also have they found a pattern of children who became then shut down and dismissive of when their parent then or the mom came back into the room, almost like, I don't need you.
Okay.
Okay,
So
so-
3 responses.
So we described basically.
The 3 different attachment styles.
And which will go in depth, but anxious, secure, and avoidant. And the secure, I guess, to elaborate, is like when the mom comes back into the room, like they make some sort of, like they're distressed, upset that mom's gone, but mom comes back, comforts them, and then they go back to like being appropriately independent and playing with their toys. Whereas the anxious one, when mom comes back, is hard to comfort and then will then get upset, like when mom like tries to like, you know, set him or her down, then throw another fit.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyways,
So-
I don't know. I love
I know. It's
all the
super
research.
interesting. Yeah. So, yeah. Should we, let's see. I think, yeah, and like how are these formed? Like from Bowlby's research, like it was always kind of thought that it's like how your parents were to you, like how they responded to you, and
So yeah, more sort of the nurture
yeah,
focus.
perspective of like, was there any abuse? Was there like neglect? And then like we always talk about stuff on a spectrum, or like maybe it didn't look like anything, but parent had depression or a mental illness or worked a lot. So wasn't necessarily available. But now, so it's not maybe just that like nurture piece, but it's also like biologically, like is the child's like natural temperament coming into the world like just a more sensitive person. And then also another aspect are just life experiences. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty conclusive that like from 0 to 5 years, those are pretty formative. But then also like, the years after that count too.
Yeah.
Right. And like our first experiences of, dating and being in relationships. So
Yeah.
it all comes together.
Right. And
Yeah.
was there any, like, we talk about trauma, like big T trauma, like big, like things that we think of as traumatic experiences, and then little T trauma, like, were there any traumatic experiences in somebody's life that maybe they don't even acknowledge as traumatic experiences? And I like the way that Pia Melody describes trauma as anything less than nurturing. So,
Yeah. And I mean, we've said this in other episodes, but I think it's worthy of revisiting that, abuse so much obviously has an impact, but even like distancing and neglect, whether or not it's intentional, but that has an impact. So if somebody, like if parents are working a lot, or it does definitely impact.
yeah. And with all that being said, like parents are doing the best that they
Yeah.
have, best that they can with what they have. So, yeah, I never want people to feel like shame for
Right.
like if they did these things or
Yeah, no, it's being, oh, whoa, sorry.
or Julian just spit on me a little
Just
bit.
got so
It's fine.
excited. What I wanted to say though is like being a parent, like I think that's the toughest job in the world.
Yeah.
I'm scared a little bit
Yeah.
for a lot actually.
For sure.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And I think though, just to know yourself and what you need to get the support that as a parent so you can be the best parent.
Definitely.
So-
Yeah. So don't go hate on your parents.
Yes.
Like we're building awareness and kind of understanding like where you came from and why you are the way that you are. So kind of developing into that a little bit more. So, let's talk about before we get into the different attachment styles. Like this is something you said is like one of your favorite things to talk about. So the dependency paradox, kind of that codependency myth. Like we hear that's a buzzword in definitely in the counseling world, but now I feel like in like everybody's world,
Right.
it's like, I don't want to be codependent.
Right.
And there's like a form of codependency. I think about it in like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, that like, yeah, we don't want to enable somebody in that negative way. But again, like we said, we're hardwired to need people, to depend on people. And so I think there's a lot of shame in quote unquote being needy. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Julian?
Yeah, no. I just think though, from a cultural perspective, how much of an influence that there is, and just acknowledging that, like if we look at Eastern sort of collectivistic sort of approaches, and families that still live together, versus our way is the right way, like being dependent, that in the U.S. anyways.
Absolutely.
So.
That's a good point.
I mean, and neither is wrong, like, I guess right or wrong. It's just
Right.
different, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But interestingly enough, though, we have a loneliness epidemic. So I'm wondering if this, like, dependency sort of, you should never, like, need people,
Right.
is perpetuating that.
Absolutely.
and social media. But anyways, okay, that's a topic for a different day.
Yeah. So, so the dependency paradox is described as the more effectively dependent we are on one another, so effectively, keyword, the more independent and daring we become. I love that.
Yeah, it's just like the person is your safety net is the way that I was
Yeah.
thinking about it earlier. Just in terms of the mom being in the room, but not hovering, not
Right.
telling that kid, oh, don't, be careful with that or don't do that, but appropriately watching,
Right.
coming to rescue.
Being there if needed.
If needed. But then, right, like, just as adults, we too can be independent knowing that we have somebody who has our back.
Yeah. It's such good stuff. I love it.
Yeah. I will say though, this has been hard for me personally
Okay, in what way?
in that at times I very much, I don't want to depend and I'm very afraid of being seen as needy.
For sure. I've heard that from so many clients we talk about like communicating your needs and whatnot. Like I'm encouraging them like, well, did you tell them that? Well, no, I don't want to be needy. It's like, wait a second. And so, yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more.
We'll get into our attachment style
Yeah.
responses.
So another experiment that was done that I just want to reference really quick was there were 3 groups of women, and they were told that they were going to have an electric shock. I don't know who's signing up for this experiment or if it's still available.
I was like,
to
how
be
much are
done.
you getting paid? Were you getting a Target gift card? Because, I'm up for that. But, we need some investment.
Yeah. So not sure the backstory of this. But yes, okay. So sign up for experiments. They're great. But
I have to tell you about one another time. Anyways, keep going.
And they were having a brain scan done at the same time that this experiment is going on. They're told that they're going to have an electric shock, right? And their hypothalamus is being monitored in an MRI, which is like that emotional side of the brain. It's going to light up if they're like anxious or something's activated there. And so there's 3 groups of women. The first group is a group, they're just solo, and they show significant distress when they're told. I don't think they were actually shocked, thankfully, but they showed significant distress in their hypothalamus when
the fake shock was delivered.
Yes.
Or hopefully minor shock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Second group, a stranger held their hand and they showed significant less stress than the first group. The third group, their partner held their hand, like husband or wife or whatever, held their hand and there was barely any stress at all. Wow. Is that not so cool?
Yeah.
And so from that, they another takeaway from it is that we can rely on our partners for our well-being, but also couples can become a single psychological unit is what they found is so we can affect our heart rate. I can affect your heart rate if we're in a couple. I can affect your hormones, your breath, all that.
Well, I think about that in
the
therapy room though too.
Yeah.
Right. We need to be the solid object in the room, so to say.
Yeah.
And our calming demeanor, the way that we hold space, then can influence others. So I can see the reverse happening. Just transfer of energy and mirror neurons. And so
Yeah. Well, and being so tied to, I think, with us in therapy, I think there is a certain amount of attunement and everything, but somebody you've been with for years or whatever, there's this other level of we're kind of on the same response. It kind of reminds me of ladies and their cycles.
Oh gosh.
You get on the same cycle.
Is this the reason too, when
Sorry,
couples
guys who are listening.
Couples get older, then they start to look like each other? Is that part of it?
Is that true though?
I don't know. We'll have to look into that.
I can see that. I've observed that, but maybe that's part of it.
We'll do our research.
Yeah. I'm not sure about the validity of that.
Yes.
So yes, let's get into attachments. So actually talking about them.
Yeah. So basically what you wanted to share that research to validate the fact that we do need people to help us through life.
Yeah. Basically, like backing up that dependency paradox. If you don't believe us yet, like hear this study.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But let's talk about the different attachment styles. So there's two, like anxious and avoidant fall under the umbrella of like insecure attachment styles. Like, so the goal for those anxious and avoidant, are to get to the secure. So we'll be talking about 3 different attachment styles. So let's get into anxious, our favorite attachment style.
Why is that?
We both identify as like, and I didn't say this, but like, there is a pathological like form of attachment disorder, like a more severe case, if you will, of like having attachment issues. What we're talking about are more like normative issues. So like just kind of people just dealing with relationship difficulties. So like being anxious, like it is on a spectrum of like severe anxious attachment style all the way down to like, you know, experiencing it less so. And same with avoidant also.
Yeah, and before we describe each type, we also want to put the caveat out there that your style can change. So based on your partner being a different style, you can morph in a either a positive or negative way.
Sure.
And then also based on your own work, you can change. And so, I mean, we identify, I think, as having grown up having an anxious attachment style, but you and I both are like committed
Probably
to
more secure now. Yeah, for sure. So there's hope.
Yeah. Yes, you're not doomed, right?
Yeah.
So
I have my clients that read this book, they're like, oh my gosh, this is magic. But some of my friends that have read it, they're like, oh, this is heavy and a lot. And like, it just feels like a little hopeless maybe. So that's not our goal here.
No. No. Like change is possible, except we'll get to one pairing where it's pretty much
Like, don't
impossible.
try.
Just don't do it.
Yeah.
So we'll tell you about that later.
Okay, so what is the anxious attachment style, Julianne?
Anxious attachment style is very much preoccupied with the partner being able to love them back. So there's this deep insecurity, and that shows up in ways that, you know, like needing a lot of reassurance, really trying to do the best to win the other's attention. They're afraid that their partner will change their mind and leave or abandon them. Very sensitive to any changes in like, you know, in tone of voice or level of communication.
Or touching. That
touching.
was my
Oh,
thing.
yes.
Like, why aren't you holding my hand in the car 24/7? Oh, that's not normal.
You don't want to cuddle as long anymore? What's wrong?
Yeah. Just super like sensitive to any like words or change differences. And also the fear that your partner doesn't want to be as close as you. So like, I need you more, like I love you more. They don't love me as much. Anxious attachment styles. So we've talked about HSP, highly sensitive people, and we kind of identify that like probably there's a connection there. You're just, so go back and listen to that episode if you don't know what that is. But yeah, anxious people tend to get upset more often. They're like dysregulated more often emotionally.
Because they're so attuned to details and changes. And then, though, the problem is they personalize.
Yes.
Well, I guess with anxious.
Yeah.
So you could be sensitive, but more likely there is this interpretation that like the changes are as a result of you.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. And I like the description that Amir Levine and Rachel Heller describes as the anxious attachment style is living with the sixth sense of danger. So kind of that fear sense is just always on.
Yeah.
Poor anxious people.
I know.
We love you out there. Okay. So, and then also kind of how an anxious attachment style could possibly develop. There's many different ways, but if you identify as parents being inconsistently responsive, so if they like sometimes they were there, sometimes they weren't, if they dealt with mental health issues, that would be the one that could like trigger that as far as like parenting styles. So
Yeah, as well as, once, like we said, either like if they're just not present as much, to working a lot.
Yeah.
If they're active in an addiction, like their ability to be emotionally available is going to be different.
Yeah.
So
But the key piece in that is that they're inconsistent.
So you never know what's going to happen.
Right. Which makes sense of why you're anxious, because you're always like trying to have a sixth sense of like, what am I going to get right now? How are you going to be today?
Can I trust that you're going to be there for me tomorrow?
Yeah. And that's so scary as a child, like not
Yeah.
having that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I know we did an episode on inner child work, but I hope that when people are listening to this, that they can understand as an adult, like just how much like that it's still scary. Like, yes, you
Yeah.
can be quote unquote evolved, but like when your experience of these foundational relationships was not consistent and safe, like it's going to stick with you.
Yeah.
And
For sure, like in a deep unconscious
Yeah.
way, and which is why counseling's so great, because you can pull that like out and like build awareness or journaling, all the things that we've talked about here before. So next, let's get into the avoidant attachment type. Julianne, will you do us the honor?
Yes, I will do a sonnet. So, pretty much the opposite spectrum of the anxious. So there's a lot of fear of intimacy.
Yes.
And let's say it's not that they don't want it. On the surface level, it looks like that, but it's, they are still the same as the anxious in terms of there wasn't consistency growing up. So they don't feel like they can trust. So rather than try to get reassurance, they just avoid and check out.
Yeah.
And like, oh, I'm not even going to try. I am my own person. That's all I can count on.
Yeah. And so if parents, again, just one of the factors, if parents are distant, rigid, and unresponsive, that can kind of lead to like this avoidant attachment style. But yes, they can often feel trapped. They can look non-committal. They can, and it can look in different ways of like they're just looking for the, quote unquote, the one, or kind of idealize a certain type of person. So nobody's ever good enough for them.
Yeah, just haven't found the one. And you will find with avoidance, or those with avoidance attachment style rather, that it's hard for them to express their thoughts and feelings. So you never get a really clear read. They can send mixed signals. They very much value their independence. Of course, there are those that need alone time, but it's on a different level. And I don't know, how would you make that differentiation?
Yeah, like the independence, like there's like this almost like insatiating need for independence, and just fear of closeness. Like there's not kind of this normative, like I need my alone time. Okay, we have together time. It's almost just like exaggerated too much.
Can I share an example?
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah.
I was like, find myself in the past having been attracted to the avoidant types.
Yes, which is typical for
Yes.
anxious people to be attracted to avoidant people.
But there was this one guy that I was dating, and I'm not an excessive texter.
Yeah, you
Not at
don't.
all.
You're like the far end of the
Yeah.
spectrum of like not texting at all, really.
Right. And so it was interesting because basically I think there was a gap in time where I hadn't like heard from him. Like he was on a work trip, whatever. It was like 4 or 5 days. And like I finally brought that up. I was like, oh, it's like, nice to hear from you, and he's just like, well, why would I text you every day? Like, what is there to say? I'm like, well, we don't need to have a lengthy conversation. And I'm not even talking like every day, but like a check-in every
It's like
once in a while.
extreme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
That's a lot. Yeah.
So, anyways.
No, good example. I'm trying to think. I have a lot of them because I've been anxious for so long that that is the type of person I dated.
Right. So should we talk about that? That there is there is this pull for anxious and avoidance to date.
Yeah, there's kind of like this trap of like, because like if you were to grow up with that like unresponsive, like ambiguous parenting style, that the anxious kind of desires that, like that feels normal in their romantic relationships. And it almost looks like passion and lust and excitement and love in a lot of ways, that like chasing. And it is not, or run the other way. Not saying avoidant is bad,
Right.
but that combination.
Yeah, it's pretty much, okay, it is pretty much hopeless.
Yeah.
There's that.
Yeah. I mean, and if you're, my friend, one of my best friend identified herself when she read this book as anxious and her husband avoidant. And I don't think her husband's avoidant because he committed to her. But yeah, our goal in saying that is, if you are dating somebody or like trying to make a relationship work and you're chasing and you're trying and you're just like working really hard, like that might be the time to check in and not try so hard,
Yeah.
not chase, and try something new like the secure attachment style.
Yes.
So, okay, so this is our third one, and then we'll go more in depth in each one. But the secure, Julianne?
So secure people feel comfortable with intimacy and closeness, yet still can maintain their independence. They're able to communicate effectively, are warm and loving naturally, not too easily upset or overly jealous or possessive, and can respond to others' needs.
Yeah, and they can openly communicate their needs,
Yes.
their wants.
Yeah.
And just happiness is not dependent on a relationship. Like, they want it, they, need it in some ways, but it's not like dependent. It doesn't make them complete, if you will. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's kind of the goal for everybody to like get to that level. So you can kind of, if you want to go more in depth in the book Attached, there is a little attachment style quiz, and it goes a lot more in depth of each one to kind of figure out where you are, or like where a partner is, or somebody you're dating. And we want to be careful not to like stereotype other people or
Right.
anything like that.
Yeah, I guess I do want to backtrack. Anxious and avoidant typically don't last long, right? Because the anxious style becomes even more activated
Yeah.
as a
Anxious.
result. As a result of the avoidant, which then the avoidant becomes more distant.
They push away.
Right? So
so it's that.
But if one or the other, well, actually both, were committed to working on their own
Yeah.
styles, I think that there could be some sort of
Yeah.
better outcome.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I have a funny story of not stereotyping
Oh, yeah?
attachment styles. So, back in the day, dating this guy, of course, like appeared like very avoidant. Like, I could not figure out if he liked me or not. But we've gone on like several dates, and
He drove to see you.
Yeah, from like, an hour and a half away, regularly. And what else? He would like text me all the time. We'd go to like events together. It was like very strange, but just did not think he liked me at all. And so I'm anxious, and so I text him and, like trying to get him to like me. But eventually, I start getting back into this book, and I was like, hey, you should read this book. Chapter 7, I think it is. Or chapter 7, which is the avoidant section in this book. And he came back and he was like, oh my gosh, that fits so much for me. And we stopped talking after that because we both identified like
It's not going to work.
good for us. So sometimes, in a way, being able to identify something kind of lets you let go and have a little bit of closure a little bit more.
Yeah.
So, it's just funny. Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah. But okay, I want to make sure, because we're coming from the lens of having been more on the anxious side, that we're not giving avoidance a bad rep whenever good friends.
Oh, yes. Best friends is an avoidant.
Yes.
And she's like my sanity. I go to her rather than Julianne for my relationship advice.
Thank you.
And I tell Julianne, too, I'm like, I don't think you should be asking me right now. I think you should call
that's true,
Courtney.
You need a better perspective.
Yeah, she's just just like a little bit more rational, and she's like secure now. She's engaged. She's in a happy relationship, about to get married.
They
So.
moved in.
Yeah, together recently. But yeah, like kind of in her 20s, we saw her like she didn't care if guys texted her, and Julian and I would be over here like freaking out, you know? And yeah, she could just tolerate a lot of distance. And so she's really had to work on like pushing herself to create closeness, and has done like an amazing job.
Yeah. And she gave us permission to share a little bit of her story of like why she has developed a avoidant attachment style. And so both of her parents, she is an only child. Both of her parents were attentive to her as the only child, yet also they did work a lot. So she says she remembers spending a lot of time by herself and just being forced to like entertain herself and become okay with being alone.
Right.
Probably more than the average child.
Yeah, and she did identify like her dad was like an amazing, loving man from what I hear, and he also like with that had a temper, and then he ended up dying when she was 14, and so that's like one of those kind of like traumatic experiences like thrown in like a kink in somebody's life too, of like having to process and deal with that grief at such a young age too.
Yeah, so I mean, like she couldn't necessarily trust that people were always going to be there for her, so it was easier just to rely on herself.
Yeah, be independent, and I don't need nobody else.
But she's gotten better. Like now, like
Oh, for sure.
she'll give us hugs.
Oh yeah. I mean, and she's like, I don't know, she's like so special to us, like the most loyal person
Oh yeah,
ever.
Yeah.
So yes, we think that all of these are great, but let's all just work towards secure.
Yes. And also, caveat, secure doesn't mean that that person is perfect, right? They're still going to have like issues in terms of being upset at times, but the way that they probably respond after, or come back from any sort of not so awesome reaction is probably going to be a little bit more constructive, a little bit more mature.
For sure. Yeah. Well, let's get a little bit more into the anxious attachment style, and talk a little bit about some things that come up there. So with anxious, there's what's called activating strategies. So there are situations that, like, if we're already anxious about relationships, that like really turn it up. So I want to use an example from the book / maybe Julian or one of our lives, if we can think of one. But there's this little chart in the book, and it says it's finding your way to your comfort zone. So there's maybe a sign of a threat. My boyfriend hasn't called today, and you go into, is something wrong? Or somebody hasn't called today. And like the comfort zone, staying in that would be, no. Oops, I just saw that he left me a message. All is well. And you you regulate back to normal. But if you don't do that, then you go down and you continue activating, which is maybe he's angry with me. Maybe, and then you try and seek attention from your partner. I'll invite him over for a romantic dinner or something. And then is the partner available and responsive at that point? Will he answer a call back? If yes, then you can, regulate and like comfort, but you're still needing that contact in order to feel comfort. And then whenever it gets like in the danger zone, if he doesn't call or that doesn't suffice, oh my gosh, it's been 5 hours. I left the office. Maybe he's leaving me. No sign of him. His assistant is dismissive. Will I ever hear from him again? I can't believe this. I'm going to have to break up with him. It just goes into this like crazy space.
Sure.
Do you have any examples in your life?
Well, actually, not. Well, one, yes, I do. But one that came to mind was with a client I was working with, and she was married, and she had an anxious attachment style, but wouldn't communicate. Anyways.
Had difficulty.
Yeah. I don't know. I just like I got sad about thinking about the situation where she told me so many times before, like if she didn't hear from her husband, she was afraid that he had left her. And one time she had come home and like, I don't know, some like clothes were missing in the closet and she was sure that he had like packed a bag and left her.
Yeah.
And like
yeah,
without like not really founded any sort of ration.
for sure.
But like that just makes me sad. I'm like, oh my gosh, the guy's married to you.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, to be living in that state of fear.
Yeah, no, I have some friends like that who are married, and like for her, it's like when her husband goes out of town, that's activating for her. But I even notice with myself, so I'm engaged right now and have like a very loving, secure partner, but it like pops up like when he's coming to pick me up for a date and he's not like on time, or it's like maybe 10 minutes before, and I'm like, what if he doesn't come?
It still happens.
Yeah.
It does.
Oh, yeah. And now, I mean, I can notice it. I'm aware of it. So I'm like, oh, I can talk back to a little self-talk, you know,
Yeah.
like, hey, we've got this.
Like something's going on. He'll
Yeah.
get like if he's late. Oh,
Yeah.
I do remember one incident.
Yeah.
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 So, I mean, little things like that will still come up for me.
But you're able to work through it now
Yeah. I mean,
instead of most of the time.
okay, so some of the activating strategies, we can kind of just go over these quickly. But thinking about someone like difficulty concentrating on other things.
So yeah, obsessively.
Yes.
Like thinking about the person and then replaying your last interactions. Did I, say this wrong? Did I do that?
Looking back at texts, yeah, emails,
Planning on what you need to do differently next time.
yes,
Like if you're afraid that things are on the outs, like, okay, well, I'll do this and this and this, and then he'll love me or whatnot.
yeah, for sure. Oh gosh, remembering only their good qualities.
Yes. Okay.
So yeah, I mean that's like speaks for itself.
Yeah. Putting somebody on a pedestal.
Yeah, yeah. The next one's putting them on a pedestal, underestimating your talents and abilities and overestimating theirs. Yeah, I think that's important too, of like not really seeing like what you have to offer, that it's like as good, if not better, than what they might be bringing to the table, depending on what's going on.
Oh, okay. And this too, I mean, I think this really speaks to like the physiological responses that, once again, thinking about neuroscience and what Bowlby has done to understand like that, like consistent sort of interaction will have not only a mental but physical sort of response. So an anxious type will very much feel like not just emotionally, but
Yeah,
on a
it's
physical, visceral sort of sense of unease, and when they're not with their partner in the physical proximity.
Yeah. And the only way that they can like de-escalate their physiology is to like be in contact with the person. So like it kind of reminds me of like, it's not OCD, but OCD in a way of like there is this obsession and I have this compulsion to make contact with them, and then I feel better, versus kind of like maybe validating yourself or self-soothing in essence. But yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about with like waiting for Matt to call me or like show up at my house. Like I feel that in my body, and then whenever he's there, like it does make me feel better. But yeah, I like do the work in between of like acknowledging it. And
Yeah. No, just so
Waiting
more
for it.
so like an exaggerated response.
yeah, that's unnecessary.
Yeah. But, I just had this thought. I would be curious how many anxious attachment styles would have physical touch as one of their top love languages. Wonder if there's a correlation.
Yeah.
We should run a study, figure out,
Yeah.
poll
I
people.
like it. So another activating strategy is the belief that your only chance for love is with this one person. So it's like, gotta make it work. I'm only been compatible with like few people, and this is my last chance.
I admit to holding on to that
for
in the past.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of that like scarcity mindset of
Yeah.
like, there's only
But
a
it
couple
felt real
fish in the
though,
sea.
because they're like, I really did.
Fish in the sea, yes. Yeah. No,
yeah.
it feels so real.
I'm like, but no, and nobody else
Yeah.
makes me feel this way.
Right, but not true.
But not true.
Yes.
People, not true.
Yeah.
Okay. So when your attachment style is activated, you are not going to be perhaps in the right mind and emotional state to always react and take mature responses and actions.
That's such an eloquent way to say that.
Like you're just gonna be crazy. No.
Yeah, you may, not act in the best way. So, which is called protest behaviors.
Protest behaviors. Basically, you're trying to communicate that you're not okay.
Yeah,
All right.
without like kind of open, effective communication, right? Like it's kind of game playing in a lot of ways. And it's really the only way that you know to get your needs met. So I want to say like have some empathy for people that like don't know how to ask like, hey, I need to be held right now, or I need you to be on time, or like check in with me, or whatever it is that you need. So it's really letting your attachment style get the best of you. And it happens in excessive attempts of like getting that physiological response down.
So, if you're an anxious attachment style, your way of communicating that you're not okay is going to be looking like the following. So go for it.
Yes. Yeah, calling or texting, emailing many times, waiting for a phone call, loitering by your partner's workplace in hopes of running into him or her. Julian, you have any stories about this?
Did I do this?
I don't know.
Did I block it out? No, I don't think I stalked anybody. Oh, well, we don't need to go. There was like suspicious behavior that I needed to check out.
Yeah, we did a couple drive-bys, you know,
but
it was needed.
It was it was valid.
We saw that there was something going on.
Like somebody was not telling me the truth.
I say we, like we were in the relationship. I was a part of it, and I encouraged it.
Oh, okay. Yes, that's a different story. When your partner is dishonest.
Yes, yeah.
And there's reason to suspect, then you might check it out. So, anyways, you all get the drift of what I'm trying to say there. So, though, keep on going.
So another one would be withdrawing. So the silent treatment, engrossed in your phone or a paper, turning your back towards your partner, not speaking, talking with another person on the phone, ignoring him or her, which is so interesting because all you want is that contact. So it's super like gamey in the way of, and maybe I shouldn't use that word because it's like negative, but yeah, it's not effective, right? We can say that for sure.
Yeah, but yeah, so basically being passive aggressive.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's your hurt and anger coming out in the way.
And so, yeah. And I mean, I've definitely done that before, of the silent treatment, just waiting for somebody to talk to me. So.
Also, if you're anxiously attached and upset, you might find yourself keeping score. So like paying attention to like how long it takes for your partner to get back to you, perhaps what they say to you. I mean, I've heard like some people in my life saying like they won't say I love you until the other partner does.
Is that?
I don't know. Who is that?
I've worked on that.
Yeah. No, but I've actually for multiple anxiously attached.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and not, I don't know if you said this already, but texting until somebody else texts you back.
I used to do that for sure. Yeah, and then also it can switch into acting hostile, and just being really angry in terms of
rolling your eyes, like your tone of voice, like, yeah, just not, it's not effective. And then another way is threatening to leave. Yeah, that's one. You know, making
like
threats.
I don't know if I can do this anymore.
Yes,
this isn't gonna work. But really, that's just a test because you want to see how the other person's going to respond.
Yeah, are they going to be there?
And they're gonna say no, come on, let's figure this out.
Right. Absolutely. Manipulating. So I think this is just another, that's like kind of a negative word to use, but another way to get your needs met without being direct, right? Acting busy or unapproachable, ignoring phone calls, saying you've made plans and you don't have plans. And then the last one is making somebody feel jealous, like intentionally, like trying to flirt with somebody or talking about somebody approaching you or telling your partner, things that maybe they don't need to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all those are kind of the indirect ways of communication, so the opposite of that would be like effectively communicating, regulating your system and then effectively communicating your needs.
Yeah. Should we run down real quick on how the anxious person works through their attachment style? What do you think?
Yeah. Let's do that. And we don't have to be too quick, I want to make sure that we so this is our coaching session for the anxious attachment style. So
in other words, what to do?
yeah, how to not
deal.
do all of those things. And I had just said this, but number one is to acknowledge and accept your true needs. So, and something that I think about whenever I think about this is the book, The Rules.
Oh, yeah.
Which is like, if you haven't heard of The Rules, it's basically like kind of millennial dating advice on how to like get the man of your dreams. And I'm sure there's one out there for dudes too.
Yeah, but very old school.
Yeah.
In their approach.
Yeah, and I think that it can be like maybe helpful for certain people, but it can also be detrimental because it talks about like don't tell them certain things or don't act a certain way. Don't double text. And there is some validity, like we don't want to be like aggressively expressing and appropriately expressing your needs is necessary, and being authentic.
Yeah.
Because you're going to bring that to the table throughout the duration of your relationship.
Right. Like if you suddenly then flip a switch, they're like, who are you?
Yeah. So I kind of want to show my colors up front and be like, yeah, I need to talk every day.
Yeah.
I need to, whatever it is. This is who I am versus like trying to hide it.
Yeah. And I want to say, from my perception of reading one part of that book, it was definitely like I felt like they suggested, appearing busy and like being dishonest.
Yeah.
Where it's like, no, you want to have your own life, but you don't want to lie.
Right. And you're talking about the rules specifically, not
No,
attached.
not attached.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think that like, so maybe too, like the goal of it, like the underneath is like, yeah, have your own life, like have a balanced life. Don't be like obsessive about the relationship.
Yeah, be secure.
Invest in like your social circle, your hobbies, your work. But yeah, don't do it by just like lying about being busy.
Right.
Like actually do it. Like
right.
Have your life.
Yeah. And they had some rule about like only, having 2 nights a week be available for dating.
Yeah.
Which, okay, anyways.
Yeah. Well, and then another thing, this is what I tell my clients who are like more anxious. So they fill up their brain with more, or their thoughts more so of this new relationship or dating and whatnot. And so I help them we kind of like pull that out into a pie chart of like, how much time and energy are you thinking about dating? Like, where do we need to add in? Like, okay, some activities, some friendships, some like other things too. So if you can kind of think about like your mind in a pie chart.
Yes. That's a great visual.
What's number 2, Julianne?
Oh, yes. Worth repeating. Recognize and rule out any avoidant types.
Yeah. If
who
you
are not
dating.
Yeah, if you're dating and they are not actively working on becoming less avoidant.
Yes.
Like we said before, it's just going to be like, it's basically the kryptonite for a relationship. So
right. And it can feel very much like love in a lot of ways.
Yeah. When you finally do get that positive attention.
Yes. Yeah. Versus like if you're dating like hopefully a secure person or an anxious person who's like working towards secure, like it can feel very boring. It can feel like, I don't know, not like love, because I'm not having to chase. I'm not having to like go and do. So I think that that's really hard for people that switch from seeking out avoidant people to switching to secure. Like you have to try to like invest in that relationship. So, and then just some indicators of an avoidant person in a relationship as they send mixed signals. They long for the ideal relationship. They desperately want to meet the one. They disregard your emotional needs. They may call you too needy, too sensitive, overreactive. They ignore things that you say, like if it's inconvenient for them. Address your concerns as if it's in the court of law. And you can't get your message across to them. So that was quick, but brief description of what you want to avoid. So what is the third thing?
Yeah, I think we touched on this already. Once again, be yourself, communicate that. Know that there also is an abundance of others, that there are those that are going to be responsive to you. And then lastly, give secure people a chance. That feeling of boredom or, like there's no passion, see with time what the consistency and security and how that, you feel with that.
Yeah. I just want to retouch on so like abundance philosophy, like versus scarcity philosophy of like this deep knowing that there are plenty of fish in the sea. You said that you've kind of struggled with the scarcity mind. How did you get to like abundance philosophy, or do you have to actively work towards that? Because it's a perspective. It's not like, a concrete thing that you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's developing patience and focusing back on myself.
Yeah. And I would say, like, I encourage this sometimes, depending on your situation, of like, make sure that you are like continuing to date. Like, I mean, if this fits for you and your values of like multiple people, don't just like, settle on this one person. You don't know the ins and outs of like their values or if they can commit to you, all of that. Like, you have to really like put yourself out there to multiple people. So, yeah.
There's our coaching session for free.
Yeah. And if you do, again, have this really fits for you, definitely read the Attach book. It goes way more in depth, and we will have a part 2 series where we're going to talk a little bit more about avoidant and the secure attachment type. And I think learning about the secure attachment type, that's our goal to get to. So it kind of, in essence, is helping the anxious person as well, and
Absolutely.
avoidant person. Yeah.
So stay tuned for part 2.
Yeah, that's that. Thank you so much for listening to the Everyday Therapy Podcast. Don't forget to rate and review us on iTunes and share with your friends. It really helps us reach more people.
We might only record once a week, but we're with you every day.